Welcome to PetroNoia, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the energy debate. Hosted by Dan Romito, this show takes complex energy issues, strips away the agendas, and delivers clear fact-based insights. Whether you're an industry expert or simply looking for a balanced perspective, PetroNoia brings clarity to the conversation. Each episode, Dan breaks down key topics, from U.S. energy independence to global policy impacts, focusing on the facts rather than the rhetoric, helping listeners make sense of the energy landscape. This is PetroNoia, where we separate fact from fiction to fuel-informed discussions.
Welcome to PetroNoia. I'm Dan Romito. I hope everyone had a great 4th of July holiday. I'm actually really pumped for this conversation with Erik Belz. I'll let him introduce himself. But there was a press release, I think it was in the middle of the week in January, where engine number one announced this partnership with GE Vernova and Chevron, where everyone sort of just sat back and like, what is this? But when I heard Erik talk, I immediately knew I wanted to get him on the podcast. So before we dive into the fun stuff, Erik, can you give a quick background on yourself?
Sure. Yeah. And Dan, thanks for having me here. Hope you had a nice 4th as well. Just in terms of background, so I'm the president of Engine One. Joined the firm about 3 years ago now to help stand up a private investing business as part of the broader Engine One platform. I joined from Blackstone. I was at Blackstone for almost 10 years on the private equity side, where I focused on natural resource investing as part of the broader energy transition climate solution strategy that Blackstone has as part of its private equity practice. So came over here to Engine One to bring that sort of experience, that background in natural resource investing to what we do at Engine Number One in terms of building out a private investing business.
Yeah.
So it's been a fun 3 years. As you mentioned, we've been up to a few things and happy to talk with you about that.
Yeah, the press release in particular, and I'm going to quote it here because I want to get it right, says engine number one, Chevron and GE Vernova to power U.S. data centers. And then you talked about the reindustrialization of the United States. And then when we were together in New York, you continued this theme on the reindustrialization. So from your perspective, how are y'all defining that? Because it's super interesting the way that you angle.
Well, I'll give you a bit of the backstory to that deal, but maybe before I do that, as a firm at Engine Number One, we're focused on investing what we call the reindustrialization of North America. That's admittedly a broad topic, but the way that we try to invest behind that theme is through putting money to work behind, we call them the critical inputs, the commodities, the infrastructure, the raw materials, the kit, if you will, that will be required to build or rebuild the systems or ecosystems that will allow this reindustrialization effort to take hold. Because when we, as a firm, we try to find the bottlenecks in a system and then de-bottleneck as the way to create value. And if you think about reindustrialization, that requires building a lot of stuff, and that stuff, or the building rather, that will enable the building of that stuff. That's the bottleneck, right? If you think about electrification, it's expanding the grid, more transmission lines. That needs a lot of copper. So as a firm, we'll put money to work behind the copper, nickel, cobalt, the raw materials required to enable that. So we'll get into here, you think about the AI revolution and the opportunity that really presents for us as a country. I'm not smart enough to know how to actually build an AI model, although I wish that I was. Though now maybe with these AI models, I could do it, right? I could code it yourself.
Ask ChatGPT or Perplexity.
But the way that we're trying to enable that is, the power and the infrastructure around the power that will be required to allow that technology to flourish in this country. So that's what we're focused on as a firm, and it's that perspective that brought us to, power for AI and ultimately this partnership with Chevron.
Yeah. The interesting part, I mean, you said bottlenecks, right? There was a presentation, and I think we spoke afterward, and we were being cute with the title, but I think it resonates. It's the tech bros are calling the energy shots, right? To your point, and I think it's generally accepted now, although, this time last year, people were a little bit skeptical about it, was just the sheer amount of energy that is going to be required to power AI, is this something that people are now beginning to wrap their heads around?
That's right.
To your point, we have these bottlenecks in place where, I personally think the tech bros are just not going to sit around and wait for this to happen. They are going to figure out the solutions to themselves. And in that press release, you particularly talk about, or you refer to these power foundries, which I think is really, really interesting. Are you guys talking about behind the meter, or what is a power foundry?
A power foundry is a co-located data center and large scale power plant or power generating asset. And you the sort of differentiator here is the speed and scale with which this power can be developed. And so our business model is to build these large scale, initially to your point, behind the meter, but over time and in all the projects we look at, a clear pathway to ultimately interconnect our power asset with co-located data centers.
Is the way to think about it is it's like crawl, walk, run, right? Is that you have this behind the meter technology to facilitate the expansion of AI providers, namely the tech community, and then simultaneously you figure out how to get that to the grid and then scale that. Is that the way?
I think that's a bit of it. I mean, if you step back, right, there was a power issue, let's say, in the country before AI became an issue. You think about all this reindustrialization, the power demand, the industrial power demand that our grid was looking at needing to service already was stretched, and then you put on top of it the demands and sort of the timing of those demands from AIs, and you're just compounding a problem. So to kind of your point, we're trying to bring large scale power ultimately to the market, and the unlocking off-taker or customer for that can be, in the first instance, tech customers who need the power for AI related data centers. But over time, our hope is that we interconnect our assets into the grid and are able to dispatch power back into the grid to solve demands that are needed for other industrial uses. And so as we think about where we're locating these power foundries, a lot of the site selection or a good part of the site selection is considered around where is there other sources of demand for power, where we can build a power plant, a power asset, serve a tech customer maybe immediately, but over time there's longer term residual value and needs for that power in a broader market.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And then the other component too is, I think when we did our panel together, like you immediately looked at me like with a sigh of relief, because it's a best of what's all the above, right? It used to be sort of like, well, it's all the above and that was fine, and now it's best of all it's the above.
Yeah,
clearly for the time being, that's natural gas. But what are your thoughts on sort of like these more, I use the T word, the transitional technologies on like hydrogen, CCUS? Like, are we buying time for those to scale and develop?
we're buying, those technologies, renewable technologies, will play a role in this power solution over time. But over time is the important part of this. And maybe what, Jeff, it's useful. Let me give you the context to how we got into this partnership with Chevron, because I think it really illustrates some of the evolution of thought from the tech community on where natural gas and how natural gas plays a role in power development. So, you can't help but pick up the paper now and read about power for AI, right? Every day. Which is why I'm a little bit like, now when we say that's what we're doing, it's kind of like, a bunch of people. But we got started on this project, on this hunt, was really 2 years ago. And the impetus for us was, without naming names, we observed the amount of power that a certain large tech company reserved at the Vogtle restart. Remember the nuke plant down in Georgia. And we were just talking with that tech customer about something else. And so why do you guys need that much? Is that for your cloud business? Like you need that much business or power for? And they're, well, no, actually, it's we've got a partnership where we're developing AI models. And you should actually meet the guys that are doing that. And and learn about it. So we have an office in San Francisco, and we sat down with the group from this AI platform, and they were kind of walking through again the models and how this, all the stuff that I can't tell you how they did what they're doing. But then they got to the power piece, and they're like, well, and here's the power wedge that we need to fuel these models, like this model. And we're asking, well, how are you going to do that? Where are you going to get that power? I said, well, we'll get it from the grid. And then if not the grid, it's going to be, renewables and fusion and pretty much anything other than natural gas. And, but they kept stressing, but we need power of this scale, this speed, and this level of reliability. And that was really the light bulb moment for us, because, if the observation was, well, okay, if power is going to be the bottleneck to AI,
right,
and if AI is really going to require, that level of speed, scale, and reliability, then natural gas is going to need to play a role in this.
Yeah.
There's simply no other way, particularly with the speed point, to be able to do that without natural gas. And so that was the bet for us. We said, okay, if the bottleneck to, as I say, AI is going to be power, what's going to be the bottleneck to power delivery under those constraints? And our conclusion was the equipment, the natural gas fired power generation equipment. Yes, turbines, but also switch gears, transformers, all the stuff that's required to deliver power, baseload power at that level of scale. And so that's what led us to the partnership with GE Vernova, as you allude to. So we put down a big payment to buy all of the 26 and 27 delivery slots available at that time for that power. So that gives us, and that's the 4.5 gigawatts of equipment that we now have in our company to deploy. And really what we have is a time advantage, because if you call up and try to get these turbines now, it's 2029, 2030, something like this. And so we're being able to position early in the queue to get the equipment allows us to solve the time piece that the tech community requires. But it was a bet, because if fewer people were talking about power for, AI 2 years ago, like no one was talking about natural gas power for AI. And so the bet was the customer is going to need to change their perspective on it. They're either going to have to sacrifice on speed, scale, and reliability, which seemed unlikely given the existential.
Probably not a wise choice on Whole Foods.
Or they're going to have to get comfortable with natural gas as just the initial part of the power solution that over time, to your point, can change and will change with other forms of technology, nuclear, renewables, as time plays out. So
You bring up a good point. So I just did this event in Nashville. There's a group of freshman Congress people, right? So what they do is they go in and they have their various committees, and I was running point on sort of just giving a lay of the land on energy. And they're sold for the most part. I would say they're pretty up to speed, no pun intended, on the importance of natural gas. But where they almost fell out of their chair, and they stopped me. Your point on the queue in terms of when turbines are readily available, and my point to them was like, hey, natural gas, we don't have a problem with finding natural gas. We have plenty of natural gas. What we have a problem with, where we could potentially face issues, is these gas turbines. The demand on these, if you order one today, you're getting it in 3, 4, 5, 6 years. That was something that they were very aware of. Do you think that that's getting better, or are we still operating under the timeline of like you order today and you're getting it in 5 years?
No, for natural gas fired turbines, you can place an order today, but the delivery, to your point, is many years out. I give a lot of credit to the GEs out there who are doing everything they can to expand their productive capacity to bring more of these turbines online sooner. But that in and of itself is a new build construction project. And so you go back to talking about bottlenecks. We really have hit a bottleneck on equipment deliverability because of the influx in demand for the equipment that's all kind of coming at the same point. And you've simply, exhausted the productive capacity of our companies to deliver that. Now, that then forces people to think through creative solutions, and people are doing that. And that could be, some of these smaller scale turbines, these aeroderivatives or recips that you can kind of daisy chain together to get you going. People are doing that. But it's not the same. Hey, I want one of the 400 or 500 megawatt GE turbines. You call them up and it's ready 6 months, 12 months from now. It's multiple years, and that's just because they're stretched. And again, they're trying to expand, and they are expanding their own production capabilities. But that itself takes time.
Yeah. Do you think that some of the supply chain constraints going on geopolitically is aiding to that, or is that just a separate, mutually exclusive situation, or how's the geopolitical play influencing that?
I think the constraints were there before. The constraints were there before the current geopolitical sort of issues around trade and tariffs and all these sorts of things. Certainly exacerbates some of the points and so forth. But it was a problem that existed in the previous administration, exists now. It's simply a reality of kind of where we are. It goes back to bottlenecks. It's like we need this much power, we need it right now, and there simply isn't enough kit to deliver it under that timeline. And so again, you go back to it as an investment firm. That's the type of opportunity we look for, right? Because if you can get into that bottleneck, and look, we can't solve the sort of the macro piece of it, but at least for our customers, right? Being able to go out there and secure that equipment early, we're a solution to some of these customers, at least at the 4 to 4.5 gigawatt scale. I know the gap is, by anyone's guess, 30, 40, 60 gigawatts. So a drop in the ocean in the grand scheme of things. But at least for our customers, we provide a way for them to get access to that power sooner than they otherwise would be able to.
Yeah, and then as it relates to the grid, like why I really like, or where I really think you guys were genius, and I'm being sincere on that, is you guys were so ahead of the game in figuring out, like, there's this major gap that something has to happen. But I still see a complete issue with the state of the grid, right? We were very spoiled. One of the questions that I got from one of the politicians was like, well, how did we get here? And my response to them was really simple. It was like, hey, electricity demand stayed flat for the most part for 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. And then on the stop of a dime, it's a rocket ship going through the roof. And then they're like, well, we have to improve the grid. I'm like, yes, we have to improve the grid. But one of the other problems with that is you're beginning to see like this data center NIMBYism. How do you guys view what the future of connection looks like, right? So you have off the grid technologies, but then to connect them, theoretically, you're going to have to build transmission lines. These are going to probably be in rural areas. Like how does that dynamic play out? Like, how are you guys thinking about that?
So, it's good you're spending time with the policymakers to kind of work through some of these things, because, and we do too. And you sit in these rooms and, people are talking like, okay, we need to win the AI arms race and we'll move heaven and earth to do it and all these sorts of things. But that conversation usually occurs in a room amongst like-minded people who are focused on AI, focused on the war. But to your point, you're building this stuff in people's backyards. And I think there's a real hearts and mind effort that needs to be undertaken to get folks that aren't in the room excited or the sense of urgency around winning the AI arms race. And I'd offer that if most of the people out there, certainly far fewer than you'd think, kind of going to different panels and stuff, are excited about AI, right? I mean, if a lot of people are like, well, it's going to take my job away. I'm going to put this data center in my backyard. what's in it for me? Why is it a good thing to be doing this?
She's all in on the AI thing. She's running point, but she refers to it as like Skynet from Terminator 2, like it's going to destroy the world, and she gets really dire really, really quick. But sorry to cut you off, but yeah, there's definitely that contingent where people are beginning to freak out a little bit.
And it's that is I just want people understand like that there are different sort of slices of it. You think about the tech companies that are looking at winning AI as really existential, like averting an existential threat to their own business model, right? I mean, like if you have something that displaces search, that's not good for our the largest companies in our economy that basically make money off eyeballs going to a screen to look something up. And if now you can go to a different way to look stuff up, that's really bad. Okay. That's important to the tech community. That's probably not so important to the average person that is going to have the data center built in their backyard. Then there's a huge national security element to this, right? Folks down in DC are more, I'd offer, more concerned about China winning, advancing this technology and controlling the technology, and having the U.S. be, this gets into like the arms race or the Manhattan Project or all the analogies people throw out. And that probably is a bit more, if people sort of articulated the AI race as a competitive fight against a China, people might be able to better understand what's at stake in not winning this. And if you kind of articulate it that way, I don't know, maybe again, you go back to this hearts and minds kind of campaign. Maybe that's a way to solve it, because if not for that, it's like you said, it's people look at it as a scary thing. The robots are going to take over the world, not take over the world. It's never going to take my job. So why do I even want it?
Right. I mean, that's what you guys sort of alluded to in the press release, right? That there is this sort of, and once again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the implication as I read it, and I'm biased because I do think it's an arms race with China. It's like us versus them, and if we don't control it, they will. And there's a ripple effect clearly that stems from that. But it seems like y'all tend to view it as that technological arms race where we have to win this, and if it's power that does not allow or does not facilitate that to happen, like then that's our fault. Like we shot ourselves in the foot.
The United States is blessed with low cost energy, power. And if energy is the key input enabler to AI, we have all the, we should win this. Right. And if we leverage and use our own natural advantages, and we're starting to do that, but to your point, we need to lean into that and push it further. And again, I think this really gets into a bit of a, I don't know, PR campaign that needs to be beyond like a, some $1 trillion market cap tech company, like why it's good for our country. Like politicians talking, like running on, like we need to do this because if we don't, we're at a disadvantage for these very simple reasons.
I'm so glad you said that. That it drives me a little bit insane. Like if I'm being honest, what I see the legacy energy sector, mostly in the public markets, is there's now that the Trump administration is in and Chris Wright is our Department of Energy secretary, like, oh, like the sustainability thing, like it's over, it's done. We don't have to do any of that anymore. And my point to them is like, no, like it's changed. You still have to do that reporting, as arduous and as sort of just painful in some cases that it is. You have to do this because the motivation has switched. And I buy what you just laid out. It's you have to lay out the roadmap and connect the dots, because most people just don't understand it. And that's, once again, that's not being arrogant, and certainly don't want to sound condescending, but there is this very critical arms race taking place where if the United States wants to remain the global top dog, particularly from an economic and military standpoint over the next century, we need more natural gas, we need more nuclear. These, call it transitional technologies, are really, really cool. Can't rely on them by themselves, but they can certainly assist. But you still have this competing sort of narrative of like, let's get rid of oil and gas, right? And so from that standpoint, do you see that narrative calming down a little bit, mostly from like the environmental NGOs, let's call it, saying get rid of it? Or how's that dynamic playing in the marketplace as you see it?
And sorry, Jen, you cut out just when you were asking the question. I heard the lead in, but I missed the question.
Yeah, the narrative on, the big bad oil and gas industry, get rid of it. Like it seems like we're getting a little bit more pragmatic in the general consensus. But how do you see sort of the fossil fuel narrative evolving from people who were not necessarily big fans of the space to begin with?
Yeah. The pendulum swung very hard one way, where if you took something out of the ground, you were a bad guy. And now we have a new administration, that's swinging very hard the other way.
Right.
That says basically, if you're not taking something out of the ground, you're a bad guy. Neither extreme point is correct. The answer is somewhere in the middle, and the pendulum has swung, so far against the fossil fuel industry, and now it's swinging back, but it's now swung very far away from the renewable energy sector, which I think is, kind of a separate point. I think is going to present investment opportunities in that sector, because for the same reasons that, over the last 3, 4, 5 years, I think there were tremendous investment opportunities in traditional energy and upstream space because of the pendulum swing. Right? Big capital providers, the big private equity firms couldn't, invest in, E&P anymore because ESG and all these sorts of things. Well, now, and people could pick up things at that point in time for really attractive entry prices. And now I think you have the same dynamic starting to play out on the renewable side of things, where, if you're a solar, wind, renewable developer, you're kind of being thrown out with the bathwater, just like the upstream folks were with the changing of the guard. And so over time, I think this is going to level out and really start to reflect that all of the above focus that you alluded to earlier, because the customer, when we think about tech companies that we're talking to about power, they're still focused on, how do I lower the carbon intensity per unit of compute over time? And so over time, when we think about, scaling our power foundries, there is considerable thought given to how do you do that to achieve the commercial objective of lowering the carbon intensity per unit of compute. And you might start with natural gas because that gets you online quick, that gets you online with scale. But over time, there's a commercial desire to sort of broaden the base in terms of how you supply power, and that's a good thing, right? You go back to what we as a country have going for us. We have a lot of things going for us, but in particular, access to low cost energy.
How do you think nuclear plays into the mix, right? It's fresh in my mind, and I'll sort of give it a little bit of context. I can't name names because I want to be respectful, but there is an economist that spoke at this event that I was just at, and he was very adamant that under no circumstances should any industry ever be subsidized from the government. And for the most part, I'm pretty anti-subsidy as well. But I'm also like very sensical when it comes to nuclear, because I think it's a unique situation. I think the odds of any investor risking their balance sheet to the extent that nuclear investment requires is probably not going to happen because the payback period is so long. Why would anyone leverage their balance sheet for billions of dollars when they're not going to get paid back theoretically for 30, 40, maybe 50? And so the argument that I see brewing, which I think makes a lot of sense, is that from an insurance perspective, have the federal government at least put up some sort of insurance protection, because I don't know anybody, and I could be wrong on this, but I don't know if there's any players that would be willing to insure it, but also from an upfront capital perspective, I don't know any investors that would willingly say, yeah, let's go for it. Let's risk that balance sheet for that 30-year payback, whatever. How do you think the nuclear game plays out? Like, how do you I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, but when we talk about the expansion of energy, nuclear sometimes gets kept out of the mix, right? Natural gas, renewables. I think nuclear is the third leg of that stool. Like, do you have an opinion or a perspective on how to kickstart that technology?
The short answer is no. You're right that someone needs to kickstart it. And you talk about these SMRs, these small modular reactors, and I think that that's a technology that could really take hold, but that's many years out. And so, as a private equity firm, that is a difficult, for the reasons you just described, timeline or risk profile for us. And so as we think about, investing in the power space today, it's investing in these proven technologies and sources of power. But, our offering to customers over time is intended to be broad and intended to, again, capture all of the above. And I think nuclear will play a role in that. And I'll be honest with you, that's another important reason why our partnership with GE Vernova is so strategic, because GE is spending a lot of time advancing and pushing the envelope on SMRs and nuclear power deliverability. And I think that by being close to that, as that fuel source or that power source develops, will be critical, right? Because that, you want to be able to offer the full solution, the full power stack, as we say, over time to customers, and nuclear will play a role in that. It will just be, in my opinion, sort of further out in terms of timeline from here. But when it comes, it could has the potential to be a material part of it. You think about actually scaling, clean energy. That's a way to do it. And so as you never bet against innovation, as innovation is pointed at delivering that sort of solution, I could see a world where nuclear plays an incredibly important role in delivering that.
It's just weird to me because when people hear nuclear, right, what are they? The three things that usually comes to mind is The Simpsons, Chernobyl, and 3 Mile Island, right? Those are really those are the three things. And to a certain extent, I guess that's fair. But I would also say maybe the one thing that you're missing is that it's a military technology, right? Our entire naval marine fleet is powered by nuclear. And
it's a good point. Perhaps I got to a PR campaign. Don't call it nuclear. Call it I don't know. This is something else. But you're right. It's a proven technology that we use, with our own military, and but it does have a very it has a negative public perception for maybe Clinton. Exactly. It's tricky. So yeah, but it absolutely. I mean, I would bet on it playing a material role over time. But there's sort of two problems. One, you got to unlock the technology, and two, you got to correct the and technology in terms of how it's applied at commercial scale, right? That we use it at in the military. And a lot of the SMR technology that's worked there is now being applied to, or is being thought about in the commercial sense, but that needs to be proven, right, at commercial scale. And so, how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, SMRs, I'm a big fan of. We have this just for bragging rights internally in the Pickering offices. We do stock picking just for a gentleman's bet, and I actually won it this go around because I picked Oklo.
All right,
so I'm actually pretty biased on that. The with the SMR thing, like, what's interesting to me is there is this perspective that coal, for example, like it was like this turf war. It was like if you were either pro coal, which implied that you were anti-natural gas, or you were pro-natural gas, which meant that you're anti-coal. And you've been saying it all along, like it's all the above. But do you think the general investment community is beginning to buy into that, or are they still a little bit segmented and how they approach the various inputs within the energy mix?
That's a good question, because 3 years ago, natural gas was on the do not fly list. Now, somehow natural gas has made it into the acceptable bucket.
The do not fly list, I like that. I used to say it was at the not too cool kids table, and now it's the cool kids table, right?
Staying thin, but you couldn't talk to major investors about natural gas fired power. Was we're not doing that. It was we're certainly not doing coal, and now we're not doing natural gas. It was only renewables. That's why as we think, most of the power development in this country over the past 5-10 years was renewables. There weren't that many thermal developers out there because capital wasn't allocated that way.
Right.
Natural gas has found its way back into the mix. Coal still has a hard time. So is there evolution of thought there from the investor community? There is. What's driving that? I'd like to, I think we talked about in the panel we were on. The ultimate way to get capital to flow back to a sector is returns, right? And the capital will follow returns. Now, natural gas and fossil fuels for 10 years actually didn't generate good returns. And then you had a ESG overhang that gave people sort of a graceful off ramp for why they were no longer or they're no longer going to do it. Well, now the returns are back, and so all of a sudden, capital allocators don't want to miss out on that, and so some of them, it's kind of funny to watch. They contort themselves into how they are now okay with natural gas or some forms of fossil fuel because, again, they're chasing the return. They can't contort themselves so far to go all the way to coal, because coal's generated attractive returns too, and really attractive returns. And that I still think struggles, from a capital allocation perspective. So just long-winded way of saying, there's evolution of thought. It just hasn't, it's not from an absolute perspective now, okay, purely objective, how do we get back into what's going to generate the most money? There's still an overhang, as there should be, by the way. It shouldn't just be profit for profit sake, because there are other elements that need to be considered that ultimately impact long-term value. And if the real game is value creation, not necessarily near-term profit, there's a balance between those two that need to be thought through.
There's also a growing consensus out there. I'm curious on your thoughts. And once again, you guys sort of have this paradigm with the partnership that you have with GE and Chevron. There's growing, not speculation, right? Because I'm certainly not saying that, but just for conversational perspectives, technology and energy being very connected at the hip, and because the technologists just are not going to wait around, that in the not too distant future, you'll just have Amazon, for example, gobble up an energy company or gobble up a power company. I definitely envision that. Do you guys talk about that, or how do you guys?
Yeah, we do. So within that broad reindustrialization, kind of putting money to work behind the kit or the inputs as I described, we're to kind of take that a layer deeper, where we really focus our time is where is technology driving the demand, or technology enabled solutions driving the demand for these assets, because that's where I think we have a differentiated spot in the market, just given the background of our firm, right? We've got folks, our founder, who comes from the tech community. A lot of people on the investment team, myself included, come from the natural resource infrastructure investing side of things. What's neat about this evolution of AI and where we are with technology right now, it's technology has actually become quite resource consumptive. That it used to not be the case, right? You use technology to kind of become more efficient. Well, now to power these models, you need the same power load as some large cities. And so the intersection between technology and energy, technology and natural resources is becoming much tighter than I ever thought it would be. Such that now, if you have the ability to underwrite, natural resource infrastructure investing, but then understand the tech demand, the tech-enabled technology that's driving that's a differentiated way of underwriting risk.
That was I'm so glad you said that. That was one of the main points, once again, fresh in my mind, making to policymakers, was we look at the market and we tend to, no disrespect to S&P, but we think about the 11 sectors, and in many ways, sector designation is a little bit outdated. It's a little bit of our father's sector designation. I think, the irony of what technology is becoming is that it's becoming much more tangible, right? That's something that's very counterintuitive,
Right.
when it comes to, right? You think of technology, it's like in the cloud, like you always hear like these cliched buzzwords like the cloud. It's like, like now it's tangible. You can see it. You need to hold it. It's got all that. Before I let you go, I want to, how does this play out? Like, when we look at 2030, like we're 5 years out, are we in good shape? Or not to be Debbie Downer, but how does the next 5 years play out?
We're in good shape because when you look at the way that this country and the tech industry, the energy industry are pulling together to deliver this solution, I feel very confident we are going to win this. There's a lot of challenge. There's a lot of bottlenecks, issues that we were talking about, here, but you've got the best minds, the most enabled companies. You've got policymakers that are dialed into this, and you've got a country with the resources, both in terms of the labor, the specialized labor, the PhDs that are building this technology, the folks that are delivering the energy. You've got it all right here, and it's a matter of pulling it together, and that's going to require innovation, right? We're building things. You're building power plants at a scale and speed that have never been done before. There's innovation in doing that, right? It's not just building, a combined cycle power plant that you kind of bid into the grid, like people were doing with merchant power for years. This is different. This is much bigger, much faster, with offtake contracts that look like a LNG facility, right? So you're kind of taking best practices across the landscape and pulling it together, and again, just kind of, at least from our vantage point, we're coming at this from the power side, seeing how this is coming together, even playing a part in helping it come together is super exciting, and it gives me a lot of encouragement that 2030. If I had to bet who's going to win the arms races we've been saying, I would bet against us.
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, on that note, that's a great positive point to stop on. I can't thank you enough for joining us, man. This was great. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to having you on a couple more times. But yeah, so thank you.